When I was a kid, I used to love doodling in Microsoft Paint. I drew fan art, I made animations, I even made a whole comic book in it one time. And I also had this thing where I would make a map layout, draw different factions with pixel art, and then move them around, making them fight like I was playing my own little game. And recently Paint got updated again, adding in stuff like layers, and it got me to realize how much the program has changed over the years that I've used it. So I wanted to find out what the definitive version of Paint was. What was the version of Paint that made it so iconic and turned it into a simple, well-rounded art program? Let's go by every update to get an answer to that question. So officially, the first version of Paint is just Paint on Windows 1, but I'm going to take it one step further and talk about PC Paintbrush first. This was a drawing program from the 80s that Microsoft later licensed and turned into Paint. So let's see what Paint looked like before Microsoft was even attached to it. And that made them say, we need that on our systems. Welcome to PC Paintbrush, or as I'm going to call it from now on, Caveman Paint. Not because it's such an old version, but because it's hard to make anything better than something resembling a cave painting. First of all, this took me an insane amount of time to actually get running. I had to learn how to use MS-DOS for it, and installing a 30-year-old program from a virtual floppy disk when you only have this to work with? It definitely took me out of my comfort zone. Let's leave it at that. Thankfully, I got it all installed now, so I can tell you personally that drawing in this program is absolute torture. The mouse movements in PC Paintbrush gave me an actual headache after only 5 minutes. It's all because of the insanely high sensitivity, and from what I can tell, there's no way to change it. The program did come out when trackball mice were the standard, so it might feel better with that, but honestly, I can't imagine it making that much of a difference. The brush feels like it has anxiety, it's so shaky and I could never get a drawing to look right. And even if it did control perfectly, drawing in PC Paintbrush just is not very interesting to me when you only have 4 colors to work with. I will give it some credit though, there are a variety of patterns to choose from that you can fully customize. I didn't expect to see any customizability in the very first version of Paint, so this was a welcome surprise. Something that I was expecting, which is in fact missing, were shortcuts. It always threw me for a loop when I kept automatically pressing Ctrl S or Ctrl Z and just nothing would happen. I think the biggest problem with PC Paintbrush is that it doesn't have any polish. Stuff like not being able to change the size of the eraser or the text. Not being able to zoom in or out. The undo button being really wonky, sometimes working like you expect it to, and other times just deleting your whole image. Right now, this program is a very tedious experience when it comes down to it. It's like an F on the tier list, because I can think of 1,000 ways to make this version better, but I can't think of many ways to make it worse. But hey, you have to start somewhere. And if there's anything to say about this version, it's that we can only go up from here. So let's boot up Windows 1.0 and open Paint. Yeah, it's officially called Paint now, which doesn't matter one bit because I think this version is even worse. Okay, let me start off with a positive here. The mouse movement has definitely improved. It's still not great, far from it even, but I am at least not getting a headache from drawing anymore. At least not within 5 minutes. Speaking of headaches, I hate this cramped little window. The canvas itself is actually huge in this version, but you can only see a sliver of it at a time. I think they wanted to replicate a vertical piece of A4 paper, but that doesn't work when your window is this small. So I ended up just treating the top part as the entirety of the canvas. But even then, the lack of height in this window makes drawing feel so claustrophobic. There is at least a shortcut for undo now, but it's pressing shift and escape at the same time. Not at all what I'm used to, but it works well enough, I guess. It only undoes one step at a time though, so the shortcut is not that useful, and I was constantly switching between the eraser, which you can change the size of. Yeah, you see that little display here? The one that looks very clickable and interactive? It does absolutely nothing, it's just here for show. But the biggest change here is the lack of color. The program is only able to draw in black and white, which I guess maybe was a technical limitation, so... No, wait. PC Paintbrush had color. Now granted, it was only 4 colors and it was just a standard CGA color palette, but it's still nice to have some color. I guess Windows 1 just wasn't able to display color. No, wait, what? It's like you've been playing all your Game Boy games on the Game Boy Color, and suddenly someone comes up to you and gives you an original Game Boy. And because of that, the patterns are so much less interesting to me. You can still make your own custom ones, but what's the point when everything is in black and white? The preset patterns are basically as good as you're gonna get. This version also has this weird thing where if you start drawing on an already existing line, your brush automatically becomes an eraser, which got very annoying very quickly. Alright, let me just save this drawing so I can always go back if I accidentally erase some. I literally only have one other image saved. For whatever reason, it would not allow me to save more than one image. Sometimes even one was too many, and it wouldn't allow me to reopen Paint unless I deleted that drawing. This is a fresh install of Windows 1. I literally have nothing else on this computer. I am constantly fighting with this thing every step of the way to get something that I'm not even happy with. Yes, the mouse does function better in this than PC Paintbrush, but everything else is either as bad or worse. And it's not like the mouse is amazing all of a sudden. No, it's still not good. It's just not atrocious anymore. Look, I know that this is an old version, and maybe it's not fair that I'm being so hard on it. But the reason I am is because I feel like this should have been a significant upgrade from the previous version. But it's not at all. Truth be told, my opinion might be skewed a bit here because I accidentally installed PC Paintbrush 2.0, which I thought was the next version of Paint. And you know what? This is closer to being the update I wanted to see. I like this version more right away because of one simple thing. This one actually has colors. Not that I'm in love with the color options per se. There's a lot of similar color tints here, and you can't make your own color palettes just yet. But I won't look a gifted horse in the mouth. It is nice to finally have color. You can also zoom in and out, so no more of that cramped window of the original Paint. As far as I can tell, you can't draw on the canvas when fully zoomed out, but you can adjust pixels when zoomed in, and it will even give you a little preview window of what it looks like on the regular screen. I kinda wish Paint had that nowadays. The actual size of the canvas is changeable too now. You can just type in the specific measurements you want, but you can also control this weird little window where you slide a box that's very awkward to control. It's difficult to describe how it feels to use without really experiencing it for yourself, so you're just going to have to trust me on this, that this thing is weird. Don't bother with it, just type in the measurements. You even have options for skewing an image, which kinda blew me away for being so early in Paint's history. The execution is a little clunky, but I can honestly forgive that for just how impressive this is to me. Most of the shortcuts are still missing, but you do have a shortcut for undoing, which is very inconsistent and most of the time will just delete your entire drawing, but we do have a shortcut for it now. It's clicking both mouse buttons. Pressing escape and shift at the same time wasn't what I'm used to, but it's better than clicking both mouse buttons. It's deceptively easy to accidentally click it when drawing something, seeing as your other finger rests on the right mouse button. Speaking of things Paint did better, let's talk about the actual drawing now, which disappointingly is just as bad as the original PC Paintbrush. And I think a big part of it is how the diagonals work. Often it would just revert back to drawing a straight line, like the brush itself is uncomfortable with going diagonally. At least you can change the size of the eraser now. Take that, Microsoft! Don't get me wrong, PC Paintbrush 2.0 is a significant upgrade from both versions that came before it. There is so much more possible here. I'm not just flailing around struggling to draw something that resembles anything. But I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that this is fantastic. Drawing in PC Paintbrush just isn't fun right now. I'm putting the original Paint in the F tier and PC Paintbrush 2.0 in E, since I do think that's the better version of the two. Well, let's see if Microsoft learned from their mistakes with their next version of Paint, now renamed to just Paintbrush. Okay. This is heavily based off of PC Paintbrush 2.0, and I consider that a very, very good thing. Basically, Paintbrush just combines the updated look and features from PC Paintbrush 2.0, and combines that with the mouse movement of the original Paint. There's even custom colors now, though the execution is a little strange, and that's beginning to become a little bit of a pattern with Paint. Instead of picking an actual color, it'll make this sort of weird pixel gradient for you to use. Definitely isn't ideal, but I guess this is all these old computers were capable of back then. And it is at least nice to have another option for color, so I'm not gonna dunk on it too much. Paintbrush is also the first version to make pixel art pretty doable, minus the custom colors of course, so sometimes you have to improvise a little. And hey, Ctrl-Z finally works as the shortcut for undoing, though it is still very inconsistent, like the previous versions of PC Paintbrush. The basics of Paint are starting to form here, but to be honest, most of the program is still not quite there yet. Text is still pretty clunky to use, some of the icons are pretty unclear. You can't draw on the canvas when fully zoomed out, and minor frustrations like the wobbly brush and the gradients did get to me a little by the end. It's going in D tier. It's not as bad as the first three versions, but it's still a long way from the top. But Paint is slowly but surely becoming fun to draw in. The vision of what Paint can be is here now. It's just the execution that's a little clunky and even a little unfinished feeling sometimes. Which brings us to... Now this is where Paint became Paint to me. Not only is it actually called Paint again, I don't know why they briefly changed it to Paintbrush for one version, but drawing also feels a lot better. It's not quite 100%, but this is where doodling all this stuff for this video became fun for me. Seemingly small additions like having the option between two different brushes, even though there isn't a huge difference between the two, is still really nice to have, and it made the program feel fresh to me. The custom colors are still gradients, but it's so much easier to pick one now that it has the more modern color picker, instead of the RGB sliders of the previous version. There's even some transparency options now, at least when it comes to placing and moving around selected parts of your drawing. This also goes for text, which is now much easier to type out, pick a new font for, or choose a size for. So even though something as simple as moving the text around is still a headache, we are slowly but surely getting there. And it should not have taken this long to be able to change the canvas size by just simply sliding the edges, but my god am I glad we're finally at this point now. Since Windows 95 was the first version of Windows that had a home screen, you can also put your paint drawings as your background, though the options for doing so are pretty limited. I'm now realizing how much Paint has evolved using baby steps. Keep in mind, there are years between these versions, so even though every update does include vital new features and quality of life changes, it really did take a while for Paint to get, well, good. This is a solid version though. I'm hesitating putting it somewhere between C and B tier. I'll be nice and give it a B. I did feel like this was the biggest leap forward so far. Even though all the changes are relatively small, they pack such a huge punch for the program. And that continues to be a trend with Windows XP Paint. Paint stayed mostly the same over the next couple of years, which is why I'm jumping to XP. And even this version isn't as much as a full update to Paint, as it is a 2.0 version of Windows 95 Paint. The layout is pretty much the same, and this is also the smallest update Paint has ever received. So why am I counting this as its own version? Two big things. One, drawing finally feels right. The mouse responds exactly as I want it to. There's no wobbliness, and for the first time I had the feeling it wasn't holding me back anymore. And two, there are custom colors now. No more pixel gradients, just full on color. Though part of me thinks it would be cool to still have the option for them, since they did look kinda neat in the right circumstance. But hey, now there are no more limitations to making sprite accurate pixel art of your favorite games. Paint has really found its flow here. I was completely comfortable with making bigger art pieces in this that actually took me a while, instead of the mostly random doodles I've been doing, even though they were fun. And this version was also my introduction to Paint as a kid. This is where I got that first taste of drawing digitally, and it was all because this application was so simple, so accessible. I wonder if I would have fallen in love with it if my introduction ended up being Paint on Windows 95 instead. Would kid me have been irritated by the wobbly mouse or the pixel gradients, or would I have been able to overlook it? I guess that I'm beginning to feel lucky that XP ended up being my introduction to Paint. So call it nostalgia, but I am absolutely putting it into the S tier. This version is just so Paint core to me, you know what I mean? Like whenever I think of Paint, I think of this version, and again, nostalgia, but this is also the most fully realized and well-rounded version of Paint we have so far. It's like Paint finally got over all its own hurdles and blossomed into the program it wanted to be from the start. But where do you go from there? What do you add to Paint when you basically have all its flaws ironed out? My first note on this version is just, I'm home. There is no doubt in my mind that I had this version of Paint open at least once a day for years. Sadly, a lot of the drawings I made back then have been lost, but luckily I do still have all of my old animations. These were the first 2D animations that I had ever made. It's important to me that these were backed up because if you've seen my channel, I've never really stopped 2D animating. A lot of these... No, what am I saying? All of these suck, but man, I am so happy I still have them. And like I said in the intro, I made an entire comic book in this version once, called Lucky Man. It was this dumb story about a superhero whose superpowers were just having pure luck. And then this crook releases a demon made out of pure misfortune, and because he absorbs his powers, Lucky Man can't do anything and has to learn how to actually fight. It's a terrible comic, but again, it's special to me. All this stuff represents my favorite memories of Paint, and specifically this version of Paint. This version's weird. Paint now has 7 new art brushes to play around with, and these are very hit and miss. On the one hand, it is really nice to have such a big new addition to Paint, especially after such a long time, and they can be genuinely fun to mess around with. On the other hand, they're just not that great overall. The textures don't blend well and you can't use them as a fill for the bucket tool. I only bring that up because you can use them as a fill for the shape tool, which just makes me wonder why the bucket tool isn't able to do that. I feel like it should be possible. They ironically feel very limited for how much new freedom and options they're supposed to give you. I think the idea of the new brushes is nice, but I can sort of feel Paint is trying to be more than it really is with them. Like, these are trying to make Paint more of a complex art program when I think Paint thrives on its simplicity. But I wanted to see how much use I could truly get out of these things. So,
we'll just start and just drag a little color across like it.
Okay.
So these colors are very transparent, so you get some beautiful effects. I'm gonna get just a
what a beautiful effect.
Crimson. And I'm not sure where we're gonna have land down here yet, but it doesn't matter. Where
that doesn't matter.
That's where it'll be.
Painting doesn't matter.
And also gives the illusion that there's mist at the base of this mountain.
This painting is filled with illusions, you know. That's why it looks like this. Oh shit.
People will think you work for months to get all these different colors.
Dude, people are gonna think I worked months on this painting.
We're gonna need a reflection, so all we have to do is just...
How am I gonna do this? Oh, actually...
Down, straight down, straight down, straight down.
Yeah. I feel like I should start using the fucking spray tool. Hold up, let me see how this looks.
Yeah, we'll take a little brown and...
That doesn't look too bad, actually. I'm gonna use it. I feel like maybe I should give everything like a little bit of... like... Oh, maybe not.
Wherever you want them.
Bob, I'm a little lost. I gotta be real with you. I don't know what to do. I feel like it's done. But like...
Back in here.
It's shit. You want more leaves? Bro, this is done. It's not getting any better than this. This is the best Paint can do. Here, I'll sign my name on it.
Wherever you want.
Okay. There's my name. Here, I'll underline it. Yeah. You know, I can't decide if Bob Ross wasn't ready for MS Paint or that MS Paint wasn't ready for Bob Ross. Beside the new brushes, this update also introduces a redo button, which I didn't know how much I had missed up until now. Plus some new shapes were added, like the text bubble, which is a much appreciated new addition. I don't know if this is specifically because of Paint or because of Windows 7, but my drawing tablet started working properly here, so I finally didn't have to draw using a mouse anymore. This version is an A to me. It's not that Paint got any worse since the last update. Not at all. But I do think that the new additions, and I'm talking specifically about the art brushes here, do feel a little experimental to me. And I also think that a bit of the simplicity of Paint was lost with them. But who knows? Maybe the next version of Paint will bring back that simplicity I love so much. Welcome to the wonderful world of 3D! Who looked at Paint, this simple little doodling application and said, man, that would make for an awesome 3D program. And Microsoft was so ready to make this the new standard version of Paint. They were this close to discontinuing the old one in favor of Paint 3D. What a weird twist in Paint's history, but let me be fair to it and see what it actually has to offer. Starting with the art brushes that were added in the Windows 7 update. They've been much more refined, actually blending well into each other now. And I really like them. It can actually feel like you're, well, painting. You also have an opacity slider on every brush now, which is such a nice new addition. Something as simple as this goes a long way in making Paint more of a complex art program without losing its simplicity to me. And those were all the good things I had to say about Paint 3D. Now, let's talk about how Paint 3D is an absolute failure of a program. Everything it tries to do with making 3D easy and accessible to the average person like Paint did before with 2D digital art is so poorly executed. The 2D roots of Paint are severely showing. You cannot move around freely in this. You either have a 2D front view or a fixed 3D angle. You have brushes for drawing 3D shapes, but they are so incredibly limiting. I could never get the shape I wanted from them. And I hope you aren't planning on making any small shapes, because as soon as you start moving them around, your view will be blocked by the degree display. There's an extensive list of models you can import into the program to do whatever you want with, which isn't a lot. There's no articulation, you can't manipulate any of the existing objects within the model, you can just move it around and paint on it, which is admittedly neat and feels like the only time Paint 3D actually succeeds in making some part of 3D fun and easy. But I low-key don't believe these models were originally made in Paint 3D. But even if some of this is possible in Paint 3D, even if you put in the hours and learn all the weird quirks of the program and you end up being able to make something cool with it, I can see no universe where that is even remotely worth doing. The longer I spent in this, the more I realized this program has no audience. It's too limited for 3D enthusiasts and too confusing for general consumers. Plus, it borderline feels broken and unfinished at times. There's this mixed reality option where you're supposed to move the objects you create around and you can interact with them through your webcam, but they were insanely low quality and I just wasn't allowed to move them at all, leaving them just spinning on my head as I sat there really missing Paint on XP and Windows 7. I noticed I could import animated models into the mixed reality option, which I was intrigued by because that would imply Paint 3D can do animation. But lo and behold, as soon as I try to import these models in Paint 3D, it tells me that animation is not supported, leaving me to further speculate that all these models were in fact not made in Paint 3D. You know what's the most ironic thing about Paint 3D? It's the 2D elements that it actually nails. Like, if this was just the 2D parts, I would have placed this version at the top of the tier list. Genuinely, this might have been the definitive version of Paint if it was just the 2D elements. But the 3D is atrocious. It somehow balances itself into a D. It has the most vision out of any of these versions, and I somewhat admire its different take on the program as a whole. And I'm not against making a 3D program that's fun and easy for a general consumer. I think nowadays that void has been filled by VR art applications, which do a much better job at anything that Paint 3D ever attempted to do. And Microsoft probably agrees, because they threw in the towel real quick with this program. But that did mean that Microsoft was gonna move forward with the regular version of Paint, which did get an update on Windows 11. So here we are, the current version of Paint. I had actually never opened this version before this point. This was my first exposure to it, and after having gone through all the different versions of Paint and hearing so much about this update, I was so excited to see what this was all about. And I was disappointed. Man, when this was released, I saw so many articles and people praising this version for adding layers. And of course, that is a cool new feature of it. But to me, it's also another showcase of Paint's biggest problem. Whenever Paint adds something new, that feature will be bare bones and unpolished, and then it will take years until it's finally good. These layers, for example, are lacking so much. You can't change the opacity on them, you can't move the content of them around. If you save your image, all these layers will get merged. You won't get them back. Paint still doesn't have its own format to save in. You can only save your drawings as a flattened image. Because I used to animate in Paint as a kid, I had kinda hoped that this update would make that easier for people, and I guess it kinda does, but in the most minimal way. And I know I was hard on Paint 3D, but I did really like everything it did with the art brushes. Here, we've mostly reverted back to how they worked in Windows 7. Why would you throw away all that progress you made on these brushes? They do work a little better than they did in Windows 7, but it's worlds away from how nice they were in Paint 3D. And there we go again. Now it's another feature that's in the middle of that cycle of only slowly getting better. How many more updates will it take before these things are just as good again as they were in Paint 3D? And it was here, at Windows 11 Paint, after having collectively spent 40 hours drawing in multiple versions of Paint and feeling extremely burnt out on the program, that I finally realized something big. It was the answer to my question. Paint never had a definitive version. It has almost always existed in this self-created in-between state, where new features are added, and then it'll take multiple updates for them to be refined. And when they are finally refined, new features will have been added that are beginning their own slow process of improvement. So for most of its life, hell, even today, Paint has been in an awkward limbo. Windows 11 Paint is going in B. It's not the worst version of Paint at all. It's good, but I got frustrated with the state of Paint here. I wanted to make this video because I really care about Paint. I'm nostalgic for it. It's the thing that activated my interest in making art on a computer. All the memories I have of it are ones I hold dear to my heart. I want Paint to be the best it can be. To be this perfect stepping in point for digital art that makes it feel fun, easy and accessible to people. And I think the latter versions of Paint have always been on the cusp of being that. It doesn't have to be a complex art program. In fact, I wouldn't like that. But look at Windows 11 Paint, for example. All I ask is that the Paint 3D brushes are added, that there's a separate save file and save as flattened image option, and to give the layers at least a little opacity slider. That would have made this the perfect version of Paint to me. The version that makes it feel complete and not like it's still being worked on. That feels like it's not an afterthought for Microsoft to include in their operating system. And that's exactly why I think, of all the versions we have, Paint on XP is the definitive one. It actually felt somewhat done. All the features worked properly, nothing felt like it was still being developed. So there it is. Paint on Windows XP is the definitive version of Paint. Yes, later versions had more features, but this is where Paint as a whole became iconic and was turned into a well-rounded, simple art application. After having gone through all these versions, I both have more respect for Paint's simplicity and also more contempt for its slow approach to change and innovation. I just hope that when the next update comes out, it's killer. It fixes all the problems, adds all the quality of life changes it needs, and finally makes Paint the program it has so desperately been trying to be for the last 30 years. But hey, Paint is still good. So just open it up every once in a while, doodle in it a bit, and enjoy the fact that it's here. That everyone with Windows has access to one of the most easy to love and influential art programs of all time. And I really do believe that. MS Paint is flawed, but at the same time, it's those flaws that made me realize just how much I love this little program. This program that has been both with Windows and with me since the beginning, and that I hope stays with it until the end.
Hi, I'm glad to see you today. Glad you could join me. Today I thought we'd do a black canvas, and I've taken a black canvas here, and I've covered the whole thing with a black canvas, and I've just sort of mixed them on the brush and just covered the entire canvas. Okay, let's wash the brush. What the heck? We wash our brushes with dirt. Do you ever think painting could be so dull? Really can. Okay, now look at this brush. Look at this brush. So pretty.